They flew on through the remainder of the day, traveling south through the Kennan before turning east, then tracking the wall of the Dragon's Teeth, brief glimmerings of the Rainbow Lake visible to the south through mist and haze, the land spreading away in a patchwork carpet. By mid-afternoon they had crossed over the Myrmidon River, where it angled south through the valley formed by the ruined mountains towards the Rainbow Lake, and could see the land ahead turn stark and bare as the mountains broadened and the woods disappeared. Such a beautiful, wild place, Khyber thought as she surveyed the passing landscape and the winding down of the day. Ahead, the mountain peaks rose in jagged spikes, their clusters layered all the way north as far as the eye could see. Night was sliding out of the east in a dark wave, swallowing everything as it advanced, so that nothing remained but shadows and memories. Behind her, the sun was edging below a horizon dominated by the broad sweep of the plains of Callahorn and Strelaheim, south and north respectively, the whole of it green and flat and still bright with sunshine. She found herself thinking of other times, long since past, and other trips taken to faraway places on undertakings similar to this one. She could remember the details in spite of her age and time's passing, especially those with which Grianne Omsford, who had been Ardris before her, had been involved. In the aftermath of Grianne's disappearance, Khyber had become successor Ardris and leader of the Fourth Order. It was not a position she had sought, but one she had accepted out of a sense of obligation for the Druid future and towards those who had fought so hard to see it secured. She was more accomplished in the use of magic than any of the others by then, and she knew she was the most likely candidate. So it came down to whether she would accept the responsibility she was being asked to assume, or walk away and leave it for another to shoulder. She knew right away what her decision would be. Her friendships and her personal interest in and commitment to the study of magic persuaded her that she needed to do whatever she could to preserve the Druid Order. To have come so far and paid so heavy a price, only to see everything turn out to have been for nothing, was not something she could live with. So she did what she had to do, what she was expected to do, and what she felt she owed to all those who had fought alongside Grianne. Yaranek appeared beside her, caught her eye, and pointed ahead through the deepening gloom to where the mountains split apart, and a long, steep trail wound upward from the foothills to the summit of a distant ridge, where it formed an entry into the valley of Shale and the Hateshorn. She nodded her understanding and shifted the bow of Wendaway left towards the ascending slope. Pulling back on the thrusters, she brought the skimmer to a crawl and eased her way skyward towards the split in the mountain rock that would allow them to gain their destination. The other members of the Druid Guard were still at the radiant draws, ready to detach their ends and haul them in for stowing. Yaranek gestured, indicating the helm. "Shall I, mistress?" She stepped away, giving him control, and walked forward to the bow where she could watch the high end of the pass appear. She searched the landscape for movement, but the terrain was barren and empty everywhere, nothing but boulders and scrub grass and rutted earth. It was miserable, blasted ground, forbidding enough that nothing that breathed or moved would give much thought to doing more than passing through quickly. Ahead, far beyond the entry, an odd glow rose from within the mountains, a strange greenish light that was growing in intensity as the darkness deepened. The Hateshorn, the entry to the world of the spirits of the dead. Yaranek and his trolls anchored Wendaway just below the narrow defile that led into the mountains, dropped a rope ladder, and helped Khyber climb through the railing. She didn't need their help, but didn't want to refuse it either. When she was down, she walked forward several yards to stand alone with Yaranek. "Wait here for me. Keep watch. You are exposed on these slopes to anyone passing by, especially someone in an airship, at least until it gets darker than it is now." "I will keep watch, mistress." The big troll cast a quick glance about the empty skies. "But I think we will be safe enough." He handed her the black staff she preferred, and she took it from him with a nod. "I won't be back before morning. Don't worry for me." He blinked. "Should I stop breathing as well?" She put a hand on his arm and squeezed gently, then turned away. "I'll be careful." She went up the steep slope using the staff for balance, picking her way over the loose rocks, taking her time so as not to slip and fall. She had discarded her druid robes and was wearing pants and a tunic, and had strapped a brace of long knives to her waist. She commanded sufficient magic that she could protect herself if she was threatened, but she doubted she would need any of that. The Valley of Sheol was never visited by anyone but stray travelers eager to find a way out, and druids like herself who were intent on speaking with the dead. She believed she would encounter neither this night. Within the hour, she arrived at the head of the pass and began working her way through the long, twisting defile that led to the valley. The night was dark and still, and while there were stars visible in the ribbon of sky, visible above the cliff walls through which she passed, the moon was down. She stopped to drink from her water skin frequently and took time when she did to listen to the absence of night sounds. Her senses sought the presence of other life. They assured her each time she was alone. She created, organized, and reviewed the questions she intended to ask whatever spirits came to her, and then she revised them. She considered what it was she wanted to know and how she could be assured she would get the answers she needed, knowing that phrasing was so important. But in the end, she let it all drift away, aware that it came down to the willingness of the spirits of the dead to be straightforward. She knew they seldom gave clear answers, if they answered at all, because clarity for the dead was different than it was for the living. The dead knew more of life, for they had lived it and passed beyond it and could look back at it on their leisure. But their ability to speak of what they saw was limited. They often spoke in riddles and asked questions in turn, and they almost never gave a clear and precise answer. So she would have to work hard to find out what she needed to know about the missing Elfstones. She would have to work very hard indeed. The air was colder this high up, and she wished she had thought to bring a travel cloak to ward off the chill. She hunched her shoulders and clutched the black staff close against her body, but nothing much helped. She glanced up at the clear, bright sky, the cold so sharp-edged and penetrating that she could almost imagine she could see it. When she exhaled, she could see her breath frosting the air in front of her. Too cold for her to continue for long without warmth, she decided. She had to do something to heat herself up. She held out her staff and used her magic to coat Wen and with pitch conjured up magic and then set the pitch afire. It would reveal her to anyone looking, but she had already decided that chance encounters were unlikely. She trudged on, the flaming end of the staff held out before her, working her way down the defile, her path blocked repeatedly by boulders and landslides she was forced to climb over. It had been a long time since anyone had passed this way. Certainly no druid had come through in the years that she had been Ardrees, unless they had done so in secret. Finally, midnight having come and gone, she reached the end of the defile and found herself looking down into the Valley of Sheol. It was a broad, shallow depression, perhaps a quarter-mile wide, its walls littered with pieces of obsidian that shone like black glass beneath the light of the stars. At its center was the lake they called the Hadeshorn, its waters flat and still and vaguely greenish from light emanating far down within their depths. The light pulsed sluggishly, but the waters never moved. She took a seat at the edge of the bowl, just beyond the beginnings of the field of obsidian, choosing a flat shelf of rock and wedging the black staff into a crevice off to one side, there to await the hour just before dawn, when the shades of druids dead and gone would be most likely to respond to a summons from the living. She slept without dreaming, waking often to shift positions, trying to gain a small measure of warmth from the dying fire of her staff. Her mind felt sluggish and weary, and the muscles and joints of her body ached as if she were at the end of a long trek. A couple of times she drank from the water skin, but never too much, and only when she needed the hydration. She didn't know how long she would be here, or to what extent the water would sustain her, so conservation of her only source of fluids was important. Drinking from the waters of the Hadeshorn, of course, was not an option. A single swallow of those waters